Traditional accounts of early Islamic history describe a total collision. Nimble, pious Arab warriors dismantling the massive, heavily armored Sasanian Persian state. Arabic and Persian historical chronicles, written between the 9th and 11th centuries, return to this era with a specific formula. They rely on a repetitive narrative, extravagant, doomed Persian shahs facing off against humble, morally centered Arab adversaries. This period illustration captures the dynamic these texts sought to establish. It highlights the contrast between the rustic travelers and the rigid, robed inhabitants of the Persian brick urban centers. Modern source-critical studies indicate that these texts are not objective records of the 7th century Islamic conquests. The stylized dialogue and neat moral conclusions suggest a later origin. By deconstructing this historiography, we can see how historical memory was designed to solve the political problems of a later era. These chronicles function as retroactive ideological constructs, drafted to serve the immediate needs of a much later empire. The Arab conquest occurred in the mid-7th century, yet the chronicles detailing these encounters were written between the 9th and 11th centuries. This 200-year gap allowed the chaotic reality of war to be overwritten into a curated salvation history. Identifying this delay shows that the authors were addressing the social conflicts of their own time rather than preserving the past. These histories were the work of the Abbasid Caliphate elite, an empire managing a vast, multi-ethnic population. The Abbasid ruling class needed a cosmopolitan identity to hold their territory together, synthesizing Persian administrative traditions with the religious authority of Islam. To understand these drafted histories, we must examine the 9th century political friction that threatened to destabilize the Abbasid Caliphate. By the 9th century, the Abbasid state relied on a massive administrative bureaucracy known as the Diwan. This Diwan was largely managed by the Mawali, non-Arab, predominantly Persian converts. They controlled the mechanics of taxation and governance, granting them significant administrative leverage. These Persian secretaries utilized ancient Sasanian statecraft and mirror for princes literature to govern, tipping the balance of prestige toward the Persian legacy and away from Arab political dominance. This friction sparked the Shu'abiyya controversy, an intellectual movement where Persian elites asserted cultural superiority over their Arab rulers. The state responded with the anti-Shu'abiyya movement. Intellectuals defended the Arab Islamic legacy by documenting its poetic eloquence and its central role in the faith. The anti-Shu'abi argument held that Sasanian society had been defined by a rigid caste system and absolute despotism, structures that the egalitarian spirit of Islam had rendered obsolete. Since the Abbasids depended on Persian expertise to run the government, they used history to humble Sasanian imperial memory and subordinated to Islamic authority. We can decode these chronicles by identifying the tropes the authors applied to pre-Islamic kings. The stories consistently link a historical figure to a specific political lesson. Take the example of the 4th century Sasanian Shah, Shapur II. Abbasid texts often deploy the pious warner trope here. In these stories, a humble Arab sheikh eloquently rebukes the powerful Shapur for his brutal military campaigns. This framing cast the Sasanian system as morally flawed. By using Islamic-style language in the sheikh's warning, the authors presented the later Arab conquest as a moral necessity. The matrix also applies to Shah Bahram Gur, who spent his youth among Arab vassals. The authors used the rusticated prince trope, describing how Bahram gained vitality from the Arabs, but was initially rejected by the arrogant Sasanian nobility upon his return. This served as a warning to Abbasid-era Persian bureaucrats. Their imperial legacy was sterile and less integrated with the humble and vigorous spirit of the Arabs. This narrative matrix was applied consistently across different centuries of Sasanian history. These kings functioned as literary tools to discipline the 9th century Persian administrative class. The final case study is Khusro II Parviz, portrayed as a characteristically avaricious Sasanian despot. The chronicles detail his narrative sins. He ignores Arab hospitality and arrogantly liquidates the Arab vassals who had protected his borders. In these historical accounts, Khusra's hubris draws the Sasanian Empire into a direct, disastrous conflict with Arab tribes. Khusra's decisions lead to the structural ruins seen in these ruins. Overconfident and focused on protocol, the Sasanian state is dismantled by the morally unified Arab-Muslim armies. The fall of Khusra provided the template for why a centralized Persian bureaucracy required Arab-Islamic oversight. Abbasid historians presented the destruction of the Sasanian state as a cleansing force, a violent but required reset that allowed an Islamic Iran to finally emerge. The anti-Shuabi movement sought integration rather than erasure. The Abbasid ideology of fusion combined Persian administrative sophistication with Islamic universalism to create a cosmopolitan high culture. This synthesis eventually defined the landscape of the Eastern Empire. We see its results in the majestic Islamic architecture of Central Asian centers like Samarkand. Khorasan became the definitive blueprint for this new cosmopolitan identity, merging Iranian modes of rule with loyalty to the caliphate. Casting the Sasanian era as one of moral decay allowed Persian subjects to accept Arab-Muslim conquest as an act of deliverance from internal tyranny. Breaking the Sasanian mold was presented as the only way an enlightened, fused Islamic Iran could flourish. The Arabic and Persian chronicles of the 9th to 11th centuries functioned as carefully designed blueprints for social stability. Reading these texts as literal facts misses their true purpose. They are engineered narratives designed to negotiate the cultural survival of the Abbasid state. This synthesis was eventually embodied by scholars like al-Biruni, who utilized Arabic for science while preserving Persian cultural motifs. History writing stood as a cornerstone of Abbasid statecraft and survival.